Hello everyone and welcome to our online Parent Council meeting. I'm Sarah Scott, the Chair of James Gillespie's High School Parent Council. Thank you for joining us this evening. As always, can I apologise in advance for any technical issues we might have during the meeting? For example, if you're having any problems joining us or in hearing us, or if one of the presenters' Wi-Fi freezes, we ask for your patience. We're using Microsoft Teams for the meeting because it's the system approved by Edinburgh Council, but the only people who can be heard are the presenters, and everyone else attending can write questions via the Q&A panel but can't be heard. Just a few points before we start. The meeting is being recorded and it will be put online for those who can't make it this evening, so please don't share any personal information that shouldn't be shared publicly. We're aiming for the meeting to last about an hour or just a little more than that. And we have to deal with some procedural issues this evening as this is our annual general meeting, though I hope that won't be too time consuming. So tonight I will give a brief summary from my chair's report, and our treasurer Ros Ingle will then give her report, and we will also be agreeing members for the Parent Council and considering nominations for post holders on the Parent Council. Because of the limitations of meeting online, we have asked people to put themselves forward in advance for the Parent Council and to let us know if they would like to be considered as post holders, and thank you to everyone who has volunteered already. The names of, I'm just trying to check if we've actually posted, yes. The names of everyone who has volunteered for the Parent Council in advance have been posted in the Q&As, just so that you know if you've already volunteered that you're already on the list. But if you are still interested in volunteering but have not yet done so, there is still time. Please email us at our email address, jghscouncilcomms@gmail.com. And if that's not been posted in the Q&A, I wonder if one of the producers could do that, just as easier reference. And if you could do that before 7:45 PM, we will add your name to the list, which will be finalised at the end of the meeting. Once the procedural issues will have been dealt with, we will have an update from our head teacher, Donald MacDonald, and then he will lead on the Q&A, taking questions from the Q&A panel. And as I mentioned, we can only take questions by that method, and they will be published for everyone to see by our parent moderators. So if you would like your question to say private, please see so when you type it in. And if you see a question on the Q&A panel that is similar to one you want to ask, could you like that question rather than ask a repeat? And that will be very helpful in making sure we can manage the questions as efficiently as possible. And finally, can I also ask that all questions and comments are expressed in an appropriately courteous way? We will close the Q&A panel to questions as the meeting draws to a close, but the questions will be gathered up at the end and posted online on the Parent Council website with the answers. We'll try and handle this as quickly as possible, but there are usually quite a lot of questions, so it can take time to get written answers for them all. So if you have any urgent issues or queries, please do get in touch with the school directly or with us on the Parent Council. So before handing on to Ros, our treasurer, I would like to say a little bit about the PC engagement events which we've been involved with recently, and then a summary of my report for the AGM. So I attended the Online Consultative Committee with Parents, or CCWP, meeting last Thursday, and this is a meeting of council education officers and councillors with parent councils, which takes place in advance of the council's Education, Children and Families meeting every 2 months. At the meeting, Robbie Crockett, the School Estate Planning Officer, gave a presentation on the Council's Learning Estate Strategy, which is meant to set out the principles which will underpin how the Council approaches learning estate investment projects in the future. So that's things like school rebuilds or establishing new schools or nurseries. And this will include issues such as environmental sustainability, inclusivity being incorporated into building design, and the role of schools within communities, as well as things like digital learning. At the meeting, Connect, which was formerly the Scottish Parent Teacher Council, and also the National Parent Forum of Scotland, they both updated us on the recently published consultation on education reform, which was announced by the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills in June this year, and released recently, and is looking at all the functions currently carried out by the SQA and Education Scotland, with a view to reforming them and creating a new agency to replace the SQA. The consultation runs until 26th of November and is obviously something which will be of interest to many parents. Both Connect and the MPFS will be doing a lot of work on canvassing the views of parents and making representations on that basis on the consultation. We're waiting to hear more about that, and we'll be in contact after the October holidays on ways to put your views forward. And finally, at that meeting, parent representatives again raised concerns about the way in which reforms to the organisation of active schools in Edinburgh were being carried out and failures to assess the equality's impact in advance of the changes being put in place. At Gillespie's, we have been able to set up a new system to manage this quite significant change to our active schools functions, and we hope that that will prove to be a robust model. However, there's a lot of concern across schools in Edinburgh more generally about how this is being rolled out and the ultimate effects on children's access to good quality sports activities, and PCs are working on this together. So turning now to the AGM business, as I hope you will have seen from previous communications, the Chair's report and the Treasurer's report and accounts have been posted online on our website and are there for you to read at your leisure. So I'll just want to turn to the Chair's report first and give a brief summary of some of the main things in it. I'd firstly like to thank all the Parent Council members and post holders who have been a great support in getting PC work done through this year. I'd also like to extend our thanks to parents who have come to meetings and raised questions or put forward ideas and helped with lobbying activities. On behalf of the PC, I'd also like to express our thanks to all the staff at James Gillespie's High School, the teachers and support staff, the admin team and the senior leadership team for all their work during this strange, disrupted year. And also thank them for supporting the Parent Council in our work. And I would particularly like to thank our head teacher, Donald MacDonald, who has come to every one of our meetings and answered our questions, and also asked, apart from answering questions at the meeting, has also been involved in answering loads of questions behind the scenes. A summary of the issues we've been involved with is included in the report, as is a breakdown of the presentations we've had from our school staff, which were often prepared at short notice and in rapidly changing circumstances. This is my first report as Chair of the Parent Council, and I think it is fair to say that this has been a turbulent year, where basic assumptions about how the school year will progress have been upended and everybody has had to adapt to sometimes quite enormous changes. We have tried hard to keep up with what was happening and to keep parents informed as best we have been able, and let's hope for a slightly calmer year to come. So now I'd like to pass on to Ros Ingle for the Treasurer's report. So Hilary, would you be able to pass to Ros now? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ros Ingle. I am the Parent Council Treasurer and I have a daughter in S2 at the school. I'd like to present the Treasurer's annual report for the school year 2020 to 21. And I will just make it go full screen if I can. So my full Treasurer's report for the year, as well as the finalised accounts, are available on the Parent Council website under the Documents tab. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Dougie Sterling, a school parent, for examining the accounts again this year and for his invaluable advice in drawing them up. I'll now briefly summarise our income and expenditure for the last school year. This is our income sheet, with the previous year's figures on the left and last year's on the right. You can see that our income from fundraising and social events and the refreshment stalls that we usually run at school events was zero last year because we were unable to run any of these events due to the pandemic. Our only sources of income, apart from the regular grant from Edinburgh Council for running costs, were easy fundraising and donation via parent pay. You'll see that our income from easy fundraising was down this year, but that our total income was slightly more than the previous year, due mostly to a large increase in donations via parent pay. So we'd like to offer our thanks to all parents who donated this way. And here it is in graphic form, emphasising that parent pay was by far our most important source of income last year. This is our expenditure sheet, which shows that there was only one expenditure transaction this school year, so I haven't made a chart for it. And this was the payment to the school of the surplus funds of £4,231.24 from the previous school year for the Small Sums Fund. The Small Sums Fund consists of the surplus funds raised by the Parent Council in the previous school year. It is open to staff, pupils and anyone connected to the school to bid for funding to support the aims of the Parent Council as set out in its constitution, to raise standards of education in the school, to secure improvements in the quality of education which the school provides, and to develop to their fullest potential the personality, talents and mental and physical abilities of the pupils attending the school. Allocation of the fund is an annual process which takes place in the autumn term. Applications are invited within a window of 3 or 4 weeks, and staff and pupils can apply on a standard application form. After the closing date, a group of parents review the applications and allocate the funds available according to the aims on the previous slide. Historically, the total requested has exceeded the funds available, so we've always been unable to fully fund all requests. However, in 2020, for the first time, the Parent Council collaborated with the JGHS Trust and reviewed the applications jointly with them. The Trust agreed to fund applications to the value of £1,850, with emphasis on projects promoting equity and literacy according to the Trust's own aims. Ongoing collaboration between the two organisations was agreed, and we've just completed the process for 2021, which will feature in next year's financial report. I'd like to extend the thanks of the Parent Council to Anne Henderson, the Trust's outgoing chair, and Trustee Jan Melvin for their cooperation with this initiative. This year, with extracurricular activities and clubs being suspended, most bids for the small sums funds related to classroom equipment, textbooks and online and magazine subscriptions. There was a separate Parent Council Parent Pay Fund dedicated to textbooks, which had been raised a few years ago, and the Parent Council decided that this would be a good year to spend it. One large bid from the Design and Technology Department, which had been rolled over from previous years, was regretfully declined, and the rest of the bids from that department were part funded, but all other bids were fully funded with the support of the Trust. And full details of the allocations for 2020 are available on the Parent Council website under Documents. So just some examples of things that we funded for the school. The Maths department purchased some visualizers to help with online lessons during the second lockdown school closure and their classroom learning since then. And we also funded some electrical spray diffusers for the art department, which enables students to create a spray of coloured ink for their National 5 and higher artworks without having to blow into a tube on a manual device, which has clearly been not possible under COVID restrictions. And you can see there the feedback from those departments. We also funded a year's subscription to the Week Junior Current Affairs magazine for the English department, and allocated some funds to the Support for Learning department for the purchase of learning aids for pupils with literacy difficulties and dyslexia. And you can see their feedback here. So you can see that the extra funding the Parent Council raises and provides to the school can greatly enhance the educational experience of the pupils. In the future, we would like to be able to fund not only the essential day-to-day needs of classrooms and clubs, but also larger one-off projects. But to achieve this, we would need to increase the amount that we raise. So what can you do to help? We're always grateful for volunteers to help with Parent Council activities, including fundraising and financial administration. If you think you could help, then please do email the Parent Council on the address shown, the same address that Sarah just gave out to. Donating via Parent Pay is very easy. Next time you're on the site paying for meals or a sports club, please consider adding a donation to the Parent Council via the dedicated Parent Council button. During these days when we're unable to hold events or run refreshment stalls, it would be great if you could donate what you would have spent on tickets to a concert or your cup of tea and biscuit at a parents' evening. There's a link on both the school website and the Parent Council website to the Easy Fundraising Scheme, which enables you to give to the Parent Council at no cost to yourself while making online purchases. You can download an add-on to your browser, which will alert you when a site that you're buying from will donate to Easy Fundraising. However you can help and whatever you can donate, your contributions will always be appreciated by staff and pupils whose activities are enhanced by them. And that is the end of my report. So you can take my slides away, Hilary, and I'm happy to answer any questions via the Q&A panel at the end. Much.
So thank you, Ros, for that report. I'd now like to move on to the part of the meeting where we formally constitute the Parent Council and appoint post holders. Now, obviously, if this were a normal meeting, we'd be looking around for people to sign up now. However, as with last year, we thought that the best way to deal with this online situation would be to ask people to express interest in the PC in advance and look for nominations for post holders before the meeting. This has been done via the school admin and Donald's Friday email, where we've asked people to put themselves forward for the PC or for post holder roles. We've also followed up on expressions of interest made in the PC survey, which we carried out before the summer. I hope we have managed to capture everybody in that process, but if we haven't, there is still time to volunteer, and please let us know by 7:45 p.m. and we will add you to the list then. This is a compromise approach, I realise, but I hope it does allow for everybody who wishes to take up the opportunity to get involved to do so. Last year we took nominations for post holders live during the meeting and discovered how difficult that was to do when there's a lag between what we say and it being broadcast. This year we have asked people to indicate in advance that they'll be able to take on a specific post holder roles, and we have written up the nominations received. Now I'm going to try and get those shown. Bear with me a second. It's not my specialist subject, sharing screens. And we have nominations for most of the post holders that there we go. I think that should be done now. So Hilary, hopefully you can see that now. Do you have the, and if you have, could you show it? And hopefully you will see that we have nominations for the chair, that's me, and for treasurer, that's Ros Ingle, who you have already heard from this evening. And this will be her third year in the post, and also for secretary, Kirsten Layton, and for communications officer, 2 names, Hilary Snaith and Laura Bird, who have been working on comms for the Parent Council over the last year and have agreed to share that post. We haven't received any other nominations for any of these roles, so I'm hoping that that's sufficient to appoint post holders for the coming year. The other role, which is defined in the Constitution, is Vice Chair. I'm afraid we haven't had anyone coming forward for that, so if you are keen, this is your moment. Please email us before 7:45 p.m. to let us know. So thanks very much. That's the end of my one slide. I think that's also being posted in the Q&A panel. I'll stop that now, hopefully. I'll go back. Right, that was very exciting. I think that is now the end of the formal part of the meeting. As I mentioned earlier, we'll post the final list of volunteers for the PC at the end of the meeting, so if anybody who joins during the meeting will add them onto the list. And now I'd like to pass on to our head teacher, Donald MacDonald, for his report. As there is not a second presenter from the school this evening, we will move straight from Donald's report to the Q&A, which Donald will lead. So thanks very much, Donald.
Thanks, Sarah, and I hope that all can hear me and see me. Okay, so a warm welcome to everyone this evening. I see we have 42 attendees. Coincidentally, I have found over the years that there are fewer attendees at AGMs than the other meetings. One can but speculate what the reason might be. But let me take the opportunity of thanking the PC body, Sarah, Ross, and others who have contributed to it, many sometimes behind the scenes, quietly getting on with it. They are and they continue to be a great source of support to the school. And it's really important that that interface, that connection with the wider parent body is live, it's vibrant. And I've appreciated the meetings, the calls, because a lot of work occurs behind the scenes as well. Because really my role as head teacher in the school is to lead the school community. And I see very much that as having a partnership with you as parents, and taking the school forward in response to parents' views, parents' wishes, and also the young people that we serve and we work with on a daily basis. And to that end, I think we've been very successful at James Gillespie's over the years, and none more so than the past 18 months, which Sarah rightly described as being turbulent. It's been challenging, and their work closely together has helped us enormously, and was given reassurance when there was doubt, and given confidence and impetus too when perhaps there was hesitation and concern. So huge thanks to Parent Council for your efforts and your input. Excuse me. I was going to begin by saying that now that it's almost 7:30, you see we have 43 attendees, and given the time, as they say in Edinburgh, you'll have had your tea. But I do hope that the next half hour or so is going to be useful for you. I'll make a few general remarks, but in particular, I'll home in on questions that were shared with me via the Parent Council comms team over the last few days. A few general comments then. We are fully staffed currently, bar one longer term absence in business education, and we expect that member of staff to be back just after the holiday. Business education is an area where we simply can't source supply staff. It's been that way for a number of years. There have been a lot of staff absences in recent weeks. They're mainly COVID related, but a very, very small number of positive COVID cases. They're mainly people who are awaiting PCR tests, or people whose ability to attend school is affected by their partner or their children. But it is a much higher absence rate than normal, and that I'm sure that when youngsters are going home, sometimes if they share frustration that they didn't have a maths teacher or a science teacher, but we do our level best to match subject specialist with the absence. So it's not always possible. I'm pleased to say that supply staff are keen to come to Gillespie's. Indeed, I had a conversation earlier today with someone who had left teaching under a cloud some years ago, but was persuaded to come into Gillespie's, and he was absolutely over the moon. Words along the lines of, restored my faith in teaching and working with young people. And I cannot praise our young people enough. They are just the most fantastic young people. They're brilliant. It's become a tradition at Gillespie's, and I've experienced this firsthand in the last 2 weeks when I've taken quite a number of classes myself for absent staff, is that as the youngsters are leaving the class, they thank the teacher for taking the class. I haven't seen that happening in other schools, but it happens at Gillespie's, and that really impacts positively on visiting teachers. There is a shortage of them, and anything we can do to attract them back is great. There are a number of adverts that are live at the moment, and we'll be interviewing for those particular posts in the coming weeks. One area that has caused us difficulty is lab technicians in science. We had in the early part of July, I can say we had 3. By mid-July, we learned that one had relocated to his home country in Spain, and one had taken up the offer to train as a teacher. And the third lab technician had been diagnosed with a serious illness. So it's been somewhat fraught in recent weeks, so apologies for that. So practical activities in science have been somewhat curtailed, but I'm pleased to say that we are returning to normal. One of the technicians is back. We've had some temporary cover coming in, and the other adverts will lead to interviews in the coming days. So things will sort itself out in time, but it was just a combination of things that really unusually to have 3 missing all at the same time. So that's impacted on that. So returning then after the holiday, as we've done, is very much a case of returning to familiar routines and structures. We know that is a key part of getting our pupils feeling better about themselves, their learning, and each other. So routines and structures. I think COVID taught us many things in the lockdowns, but structure and routine, of course, are incredibly important. And I know that many of our parents may still be working from home and probably long for the day to some extent about returning to work and the routines that were familiar beforehand. So school really looks and feels very normal. One exception, and the most noticeable exception visually, is young people and all staff wearing face coverings, or masks as we sometimes refer to them. And until we hear otherwise, that will be the case. Although I wouldn't be surprised if there was an announcement. These things always seem to happen during holidays, and then it takes a week or two to respond. So we'll be watching this space. But at the moment, we're planning for face coverings continuing for some time. We have got 35 youngsters who are medically exempt, and they wear lanyards or have a card to avoid the embarrassment of having to explain themselves to anyone who challenges them. So that seems to be working well. I'm not aware of a single issue or conflict since we returned in August around that. People are very understanding, and it's working well. I can share with you that COVID infections in Gillespie are less than half the average for high schools in Edinburgh. I think a key part of that, first of all, is we have a strong support of the mitigations we have in place. But also, I think the building is well ventilated, and I think amongst all the mitigations we have, ventilation is the key one. We know that aerosol transmission, certainly for the variants that are currently circulating, are key. And in a modern building with really strong ventilation, with either fortuitous planning or we were lucky, and who knows? But it's worked out. It's worked out well for us. Turning into the month of October, currently it's Black History Month, and we're focusing then a number of activities and efforts around anti-racist education. And also in the lead up to COP26, there's a deal of activity around the school, ranging from things that are happening in art, and there'll be an exhibition which I haven't already shared that information with you in St Cuthbert's, opening soon, to youngsters getting involved in hydrogen cell propelled vehicles, and pleased to see that a team of 3 youngsters will represent us in Glasgow at the end of the month, which is good. So lots and lots of things happening. In recent weeks, I can't help but notice that we've had a number of successes in the world of engineering. We introduced engineering science as a subject in the school in response to demand some 3 or 4 years ago, and it goes from strength to strength. It is really popular with the youngsters, and I'm pleased to see there's a good gender balance there also. We know that there is a demand for youngsters into the world of engineering, and I should emphasize that Gillespie's, we promote a STEAM agenda rather than STEM. STEAM is or STEM, first of all, is an acronym for science, technology, engineering, maths. But we at Gillespie's very much promote a broad, not just a broad general education, but a broad curriculum right up to the end of S5, where arts is valued and strongly supported in the school. So STEAM, we promote science, technologies, engineering, arts, and mathematics. Traditionally in Scotland, a phrase that you may have come across is a lad of parts. And that was a youth or a young person, particularly one from a humble background, who's considered talented or promising. When I meet with the new P7s or the new S1s and their parents, one line I use it deliberately, is we believe that every single youngster has got at least one talent, and it's our job, our role at Gillespie's to uncover that talent or talents and working in partnership with parents and other partners to develop them fully. We have a broad curriculum. We deliberately kept 8 subjects in S3, S4, and with hindsight now we know it was the right decision. It's one of the reasons we continue to be a high-performing school. So engineering, just going back to that point, has been really successful, and I'm aware of 3 or 4 groups, sometimes individuals, who have done well nationally. We are, for example, the team that is developing a Formula 1 type car. We are now Scottish champions, and we will represent Scotland at the World Championships sometime later in the session. COVID allowing, that may involve travel to somewhere far-flung like Australia or Singapore, just where it's been held in recent years. But that's COVID related, but I estimate that it'll probably going to be virtual this coming year. So I mentioned engineering, I'm particularly pleased with. It's an area that we developed in response to demand, and it's going extremely well. And it's one of the areas that was supported by Parent Council and the Trust in terms of additional apparatus. So a huge big thanks to everyone who contributes to fundraising. It really does make a difference also. Turning to just COVID briefly, I'm not going to dwell on that because it's covered in my Friday update. But the numbers tend to be fairly low. I generally don't mention whether it's pupils or staff who test positive for COVID. We've been asked to retain that anonymity by the council, so we respect that. Each Monday morning, I make a public announcement on the school's tannoy system, just a reminder to the youngsters about our mitigations, and it's hands, face, and how they conduct themselves in the community. And on all these fronts, I'm just delighted with the way that our pupils are responding. A reminder about lateral flow testing. We encourage our youngsters to undertake lateral flow testing, and we would suggest Thursday mornings and Sunday mornings to have some kind of routine. And a recent development in the last 3 weeks is vaccinations for youngsters who are over 12. You may have seen the national news tonight that Scotland has had great success there. I think the model of using drop-in centres rather than schools. First of all, I'll breathe a sigh of relief because trying to organise vaccinations in schools is tortuous, to say the least, as we discovered when we had flu vaccinations a week ago last Thursday, where we vaccinated around 1,200. It was really challenging to it. In Scotland, for the COVID vaccinations for over 12s, we've gone down the drop-in centres. It's really successful. We've got around 40% of 12 to 15-year-olds now vaccinated in Scotland, by comparison with around 13% in England. So no doubt that will allow cross-border learning to take place to look at how one area of the UK is more successful than another. Beyond that, in no particular order, I'm pleased to say that the extracurricular side of the school has really returned with gusto. Huge thanks to parents who worked with us on that, and yes, put pressure on us, but it was nice pressure. And that's where the Parent Council and parents, your engagement is important, because it does allow us to focus on what's important. And we were delighted to support that, and we put resource and time into ensuring that it happens, with ably supported by our active sports coordinator. So we took the lead on that, and things are running. We'll soon be reviewing that. And again, thanks to parents who are using donations or donating money to support the programme, because we have donations from parents. We are able to buy in coaches, and that is a main reason why we have such a diversity, and also in some occasions better qualified coaches. And that's not to diminish the importance of having parent volunteers, but a combination of parent volunteers and paid coaches, which is what we had before, and that's what the model that is successful here at Gillespie's. Duke of Edinburgh is very much up and running. We've had gold residentials in recent times. That is the only residential that the council is allowing to happen at the moment. We have a really strong programme of international visits, which I'm really keen for them to resume, but I don't see that happening before the latter half of 2022. And for parents who are new, we have 5 international exchanges, with a 6th and possibly a 7th coming on stream. We're hoping to develop a link with Finland in terms of sustainability and what they do, and we're also looking at developing a school link with a school in Nova Scotia, so that our Gaelic pupils can also benefit going forward from international links. I think that international links is incredibly important. It's something I've worked really hard at over the 10 years I've been at Gillespie's, something I see as really, really important, and my mantra tends to be that we must continue to build bridges between countries rather than build walls. And the young people traveling and meeting each other and having those connections, I think, is the way to go. And I think it's really, really important. And it's been a strong feature of our school in recent years. And I will do everything I can to ensure the programme is up and running in the next year or so. They were the main areas I wanted to cover. I'm now going to turn to some of the questions that were shared with us in advance. And forgive me if they appear to be in somewhat random order. I've attempted to group them, but 1 or 2 came in slightly later, which is absolutely okay. But I'll just take them in the order that I have them in front of me. Is the school accepting higher revision past papers that pupils are no longer using? Yes, please. If they could be handed in at reception, we will find a means of distributing them to pupils. So yes, please. So that's higher revision and past papers, or indeed any any materials or revision books that are redundant, please pass them to the school and we will use them. And at this point, a plea, if you come across any textbooks that have not been returned from last year, we will welcome their return. We'd like to meet those books again, because some of them are quite difficult to obtain. They may be out of print, so we would love to see those coming back. A question about catch-up teaching following COVID, or how is any lost learning to be dealt with? We are doing this first of all with years 1, 2, and 3, or years 1 and 2. It's very much a case then of covering and homing in on the areas that are essential in the broad general education. We at Gillespie's, we aim to cover the broad general education, the E's and O's, the content of the courses. We tend to do it in 2 years at Gillespie's rather than 3, which happens in other schools. I think that pace and challenge with strong support is the way to go, and is one of the ways you get high attainment. So we will look at the content of that and ensure that we home in on the content and the skills in particular that will allow to strong attainment further up the school. So there'll be areas we may curtail, and there may be areas that we will home in and focus on more in order to compensate. I don't like the expression lost learning. You'll not hear me using that in any public documentation. I think it's an unhelpful term. And I wouldn't underestimate how during lockdown, perhaps some of our youngsters developed other skills that may come to the fore and in some way may benefit them going forward. Certainly resilience and their IT skills will have been enhanced. Years 3, 4, 5, and 6, there are revisions that have taken place to courses in response to time that may have been lost through lockdown. So courses are truncated in response to that. So I'm comfortable and I'm confident with that. The changes they vary across the different subject areas. And I'm not hearing heads of department complaining about it. They're just getting on with it. The plan this year for SQA, if I can just touch on that, is that we will return to a diet of exams, which will be primarily in May, and they may spill over into June. The SQA timetable for next year has been published, and that's available online. Mr. Rob Shankland, who is our SQA coordinator, shared that with parents a week or so ago. Our plan is to return to traditional prelims, but I know around that there are tensions in that would involve youngsters having some exam leave. So we're going to try and find a balance, which will be time in school, perhaps less exam leave than they would normally have. I know there are concerns about time that may have been lost through lockdown. But we're also keen to replicate the exam experience as closely as possible to give youngsters experience of the big hall and just the experience of being with invigilators and large exams. My preference is to replicate the exams that will take place with the final exams as closely as we can. That's my preference. I know other schools will take an approach where they break the exams into small parts or chunks. There are pros and cons for each, but in Valens, I prefer to replicate or to have a look at what the final exam is like. It's served us well over the years, and I know I compare notes with other high-performing schools, Boroughmuir, St Thomas's, and also independent schools. I keep an eye on what they're doing, and we've seen pretty much in accord in terms of what our approaches are going to be. Continuing, moving on, there may be other questions that people have about those aspects. In terms of Wi-Fi instability, that question arose and the unreliability really of our Wi-Fi. I raised that as a formal complaint with the council last week. I received a very positive response and was assured that efforts were being made across the council to update servers and connectivity, and also issues around 365 applications and how we connect to them with 365, Office 365 products. I'm reassured that work is going to be undertaken over the holidays across Edinburgh in total. The issue was across schools, which I think is perhaps unfortunate ahead of a rollout of iPads being issued to all our pupils. In relation to iPads being issued to all pupils, I anticipate that they will be issued to the remaining pupils soon into the new year. There may be a little bit of a delay on that. I honestly cannot remember what was earlier shared with parents about the distribution date. But the latest word I have is that they will be distributed in early January or early in the new year, so that the plan is that every pupil has an iPad which they can use at home or in school to basically to complement their learning. It'll be a city council control machine, so they won't be able to download various things onto it. They will only be able to access the apps as designated by the council. There are about 100 of these that are allowable. And the pioneers in this area, there are a few schools in Edinburgh who have trialled these over the years. So we know that the iPads are reliable, they're robust, and they work well. And so they can be part of the learning. One or two parents have been asking about, over-reliance on technology and not using jotters and pen and paper. And interestingly, in the last 2 or 3 days when I've been taking classes myself, I've been asking youngsters about their preference for using technology or jotters and pens and pencils. The majority prefer jotters and pens and pencils. And interestingly, there is some evidence that a retired head teacher through in the West shared with me. There's some evidence to show that when people are writing information on paper, there may be a process to do with how the brain works where information retention is stronger than if you were using a keyboard. I throw that in as a possibility. I don't believe it's robust research, but it's interesting. It's food for thought. I think it's early days in terms of how we use technology to support learning. I'm not keen to be overly reliant on technology. I much prefer a combination. I think it will vary from one youngster to another. As I say, it's early days. Other questions, and I'm just scanning through here. I've touched on SQA. There's another question in regard to pupils who are learning from home or self-isolating, as the question was putting it. It was in an ideal world when the teacher is teaching the class in a classroom, the work would simultaneously be added on to Teams, and that was my hope that would happen. In practice, that hasn't proved possible. It's simply there are some elements of work that teachers are doing, they simply cannot add it simultaneously onto Teams, but we will encourage and we'll endeavour to put work onto Teams to try and support youngsters who are working from home for whatever reason, whether it's COVID-related illness or whatever. And to that end, we shared a paper with parents today, just a summary of what we think is a useful advice paper and for people who are working from home. Our ideal or preference is that youngsters are in school and working face-to-face with staff. Doing both, teaching youngsters at home online and teaching them in class. That may be possible in the future, but our attempts to do that in the autumn last year with fairly intensive support, and it was in the case of higher psychology with youngsters who had joined us from another school, it proved prohibitively difficult to do for a whole variety of reasons. We're not there yet. I think there should come a day, for example, as we learn from universities who are better at this than we are, where they record lectures. They're then online and very, very high quality for students to access afterwards. I think that's an area I would like to pursue, but we'll need a considerable investment in terms of the quality of technology that we have in schools. But it's one that I'd like to discuss at a later stage with Parent Council and how we might work together in terms of persuading council, etc., to go down that route. In summary then, iPads technology, should another lockdown, and I just reassure you there is no plan for any further lockdowns. The direction of travel is very much about vaccinations and creating immunity across the population. I think schools would be the last to close. Very much then face-to-face teaching in school, various mitigations we have. Youngsters will be issued with iPads, and that'll supplement their learning. I mentioned lockdown, but there is absolutely no plan to have lockdown at all. I'm hoping that continues, that we are going to be in school working face-to-face. One or two other questions, if I may, just to finish up, Sarah, before I hand back to you to see if there's anything that's coming in. Will the S1 residential trip take place next year? No decision has been taken on that as yet. The S1 trip we normally run just prior to the Easter holidays, so it will be towards the end of March. And it would normally involve taking all of S1, which is potentially 320, to a residential centre. The centre we've used is in Lockerbie. It's sufficiently far for youngsters to feel they're on a trip away from home, but it's close enough to allow us, if there were any emergencies, we can get people back home if we needed to. But I would love for that to go ahead. I think it's a really great way to complete the first year and to cement and galvanise relationships and just prepare for getting further into their studies in second year and beyond. So I'm hoping it will happen, and I'll keep parents informed in the coming weeks. Final query I have is in relation to Young Scot cards, and I don't have a definitive answer for that. But as I mentioned to Sarah just prior to the meeting, I will find out. I don't know at the moment whether this is an isolated issue affecting a small number of S1s or whether it affects all. So perhaps contact me directly or come through the Parent Council, and I will find out if that's an issue, which clearly it is for some parents at least. Then I'd want to address and resolve it so we can clear that out of the system so that youngsters can settle in. Okay, there finishes my report, Sarah, and what I can do just now then is turn to the Q&A section. Does that, Sarah, if you want to give me a nod, shall I do that? Great. You're on mute, Sarah, so I'll just continue. Yeah, you're now live, Sarah.
Thank you, yes. My unmute is very, very poor. Yes, there's only a few questions, so hopefully there'll be time to deal with them all this evening. Well, at least we can try. I'll pass that back to you, Donald.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. What I shall do is I will order them in the most liked. Sounds like my Facebook page where I look at the ones that are most liked. So bear with, I'm just going to scroll through them. Yeah, the one that is most likely is thank you to the Parent Council and thanks to the office bearers for the great work for standing in post for the coming years. I would echo that. Really, really important. The next most likely question is, how did James Gillespie's compare with other schools with exam results this year? Anecdotal evidence or feedback is that Gillespie's marked more strictly. Has this shown to be the case in results, e.g. JGHS lower in the exam results table? I think the anecdotal evidence, we probably were stricter. I think we were stricter. But our results broadly in line with other years. But the early results data that I've seen from other schools suggests that they were maybe less strict. So we may have been more strict. But we'll see when the various comparisons come out, which they will, because the last couple of years are unusual in that the data, exam results data, isn't based on exam performance. It was based on, first of all, really was teacher judgment in 2020, and they were called assessments last year. I don't want to get into the debate about assessments or exams. As far as I'm concerned, they were exams. They were an examination of youngsters' competence, and we chose to run longer exams. So I think the anecdotal feedback suggests that we probably were stricter than others. But that's just a small number of Edinburgh schools I've looked at. I'm not sure nationally what happened. Moving on, if I may. S6 classes, how they're coping with half class, half digital education. Pleasingly, with the S6, we have very, very few youngsters who we were not able to fully timetable. I think the last Parent Council meeting I met with 3 or 4 advanced hires out of the 16 or so advanced hire classes that we offer that weren't fully timetabled. I think that's still the case. It's a really small number. So the concerns we shared with parents at the beginning of the year, how that might impact, is a good deal less than it was. Having access to the Children First building has allowed us that additional space, which allows us to do that. The school capacity, just in terms of figures, the school pupil capacity currently is 1,450. We have 1,540 enrolled in the school. So there's a difference, if you like, of 90, and it was that 90 that we then sought to mitigate against by having additional space. And the Children First building, which, if you don't know, is the building on Whitehouse Road, is part of the school grounds. We use that. It's used only by S6 for S6 classes, and it's also used for S6 study. And they apply for a space to study there through Mrs. Stewart, she works closely with that group. Okay, and I'm going to go back. So what guidance is there for pupils choosing subjects to help them keep their favoured options open, and how are parents included in that process? I'm thinking the question then is about course choices as youngsters move from S2 into S3 and then S4 into S5, etc. These are the areas where youngsters choose subjects. So just a brief overview, if I may. Youngsters going from S2 into S3, they will reduce the number of subjects they have from 16 to 8. Yes, it's possible for a youngster to do 3 languages. Yes, it's possible for a youngster to do 3 sciences. A whole variety of permutations as possible. It's one of the advantages of being in a larger school. And information around course choices, etc., will be coming out soon after the October break. We are meeting as a senior team, in fact, tomorrow to look at a timescale for that, because we feel that we have to get the course choices done slightly earlier to better plan for transitioning and using Darach next year. So we're aware that, and certainly we're keen to get something out to parents, is at least a timescale by the end of October, early November. We'll do that quite soon. We will need that process completed slightly earlier this year to get the ball rolling. Is there any update? The next question asked, any update on the Gaelic education plans at Liverton, or are they still looking at alternative sites? Is the possible ongoing impact on JGHS being assessed? So 2 parts to that question. The first part, the situation with the new Gaelic school is that the council, following discussions with the Scottish Government, have asked for additional finance to allow them to scope the possibility of looking at alternative sites, alternative to Liverton. So they would look at more central sites. One of the sites, for example, being the former police headquarters at Fetis. That would be one of the sites. There's a preference shown by many parents. Either they wanted a standalone Gaelic school, which wasn't going to be perhaps umbilically linked to essentially an English school, and there's good reasons for that. And the feeling also that Liverton perhaps wasn't as central as people would like. So that's the current situation then, is that work is ongoing, and I'd be hoping to hear soon from the council in terms of what the next stage would be. It would involve a statutory consultation with parents so that the best possible outcome for all the youngsters would be obtained. Is the possible ongoing impact on James Gillespie High School being assessed? Can I assure you that is uppermost in my mind, the overcapacity issue that we have, and that's not solely attributable to Gaelic medium education pupils being at Gillespie's. We would be over capacity whether Gaelic medium pupils would be with us or not. That's the trajectory of the role rises that we're facing. By way of example, we currently have, as I say, a roll of 1,540, and we have around 250 on the waiting list, of whom around 100 are on catchment. So the school is growing for a whole variety of reasons. It's popular, it's successful, brand new campus, etc. Changes perhaps in geopolitics. We've got families relocating from Hong Kong, a whole number of factors. Changes to house and multiple occupation licensing some 5 or 6 years ago. All of these are impacting on our rising rolls. Indeed, our roll is scheduled to rise to around 2,000 in 4 or 5 years' time. And beyond that, well, it's forecast to fall, but we will see. And it's an area I know that the Parent Council will be actively involved in. It's a questioning and querying. I think there's a really important role for the Parent Council to do that. It's challenging and supporting the council to make the decision about school estate planning and so on and so forth. It's an area that's hugely important. In terms of impact on James Gillespie's High School, I think the measures we have in place are sufficient, and they do mitigate against what would be negative consequences of overcrowding. It's busy, but I think we're managing, and it's fine. At the moment, I don't think it's affecting us adversely. I don't believe that it is. The question then: when are the S4 to S6 pupils due to hear the results of any SQA appeals? imminently, I would have thought. Now, there would have been communication from Mr. Shanklin as to when that was due, because the SQA published a schedule of times. I can't remember what that was, but it should be in that documentation. If not, I will come back and respond to that when I complete the questions post-meeting. And iPads, I mentioned. Question about homework. I was at one. My son S2 very rarely gets any homework because there are no homework type policy at Gillespie's, although perhaps change in S3. Thank you. There isn't a no homework. Perhaps we have a different approach to homework. There's certainly for S1 and S2, there's a no homework policy when it comes to holidays. That we do say. So with the October week coming up, they should not be getting any homework, and they should not be preparing for assessments the week after the holiday. I've said that to staff. The youngsters need their breaks. The homework tends to more likely be along the lines of assignments and so on and so forth. So, but also, and this is not, I hope doesn't come across as me copping out of this, there is always homework to be done that youngsters should be reviewing and looking over their work covered that day. That's always homework that's to be done. But I wouldn't worry too much about there not being lots and lots of homework. Personally, and having two daughters come through high school and they were at Gillespie's, I would much prefer that my kids and your kids had time to develop other skill sets, music, their drama, their sport, and worry less about spending hours and hours and hours each evening poring over work and assignments. The homework workload does increase quite sharply when they move into S3 and S4. It does. So don't worry too much if your child seems to be getting less at the moment in S1, S2. Instead, encourage them to A, look over their work, and B, pursue their other leisure pursuits, whether it be sport, drama, playing a musical instrument, and reading for pleasure. You kind of emphasize that enough. And also, if they can, keeping up to speed with current affairs. Youngsters, they tend not to read newspapers these days. They'll get the information on various apps and in bulletins using their smart devices. Encourage them to do that and be au fait and current with world affairs and engage them in that conversation. I think I've been through. There's a question about the assets of the James Gillespie's High School Trust. The James Gillespie's High School Trust, they do publish documents relating to their financial details, etc. It's on the trust section of the Gillespie's website. So information relating to that is on there. They, as with the Parent Council, we hold an AGM each year and they do publish their accounts. But the funds that they have come largely from bequests, former pupils who leave, and sometimes quite considerable sums of money to the school so they can work with us to ensure that various initiatives and projects that might not be necessarily supported by the council are supported for the benefit of all pupils at James Gillespie's. I've been through the various questions and I'm happy to pass back, Sarah, to you at this point and direct me to any questions perhaps I've not covered.
Thank you very much for that, Donald. I see there's one question about music tuition and the lack of opportunities, particularly for S2s, to take up instrumental tuition because of the numbers involved there. I don't know if you can see that in the Q&A. It came in at 7:46 p.m.
Okay. Thanks. And let me just read that. And I'm not sure if the questions are visible to those listening. So let me just read it out. And that also gives me a chance to process and then respond while I'm reading it. So bear with me. So why have the music department been so surprised by the number of pupils who want to audition for instrumental tuition? Since S2 pupils didn't have the opportunity to audition last year, music department should have been expecting at least twice the number of pupils as 2019, given the larger roles. And yet they've been telling pupils that there's a shortage of spaces because there are more pupils than left in last year. This makes no sense because there were pupils who left in 2020 as well. S2 pupils are particularly disadvantaged because there are fewer of them who are being allowed to audition after waiting a whole year to do so. So first of all, thank you for sharing that question. It's been liked by a number of parents. I would be surprised if the music department would be surprised. I'm not suggesting for a minute that the question is wrongly intended or inaccurate. It would be fair, given that we had a year as the new S2 going into, through S1, there wasn't the opportunity to audition. So one would reasonably expect that we would have far more additions at this stage. That goes without saying, because there wasn't the opportunity to audition last year. What I will have to look at, and that is whether or not the amount of, we have an allocation of hours which are delivered by music instructors to the school. What I don't know at the moment is whether or not the number of hours available has risen in proportion to the rising school roll. And perhaps that's a discussion, maybe that's a question that Sarah could direct to me formally so I can inquire. I think it would be reasonable to expect that the amount of musical tuition would rise in proportion to the school roll. If that wasn't the case, that would be a cut. And my understanding of the Scottish Government announcement was that music tuition would not be cut in schools. So this is maybe one that we need to return to. And I'm disappointed to hear that youngsters who are expecting musical tuition have lost out. That's not something I'm comfortable with. I think that where there's a demand for it, then we should do our level best to meet that demand. So Sarah, I look forward to corresponding with you on that and finding out what the concern of the issue is. But in the meantime, Music Department will continue to audition, and it's nothing new for us to have more demand than there are spaces available. But it sounds from the question that there is a higher demand this year, which we'll do our best to meet. And if not, I'll come back and I'll share honestly why that's the case. Yeah, let's correspond further on that and find out what's happening, because music is just so important to the soul, and it's one of the reasons we're successful as a school, because we have so many youngsters. I go back to the lad of parents earlier. We need to have our youngsters firing in drama, performing arts, maths, sports, and all the rest of it. And if that's their talent, their aspiration, we should make every effort to meet it. So let's continue that one. Anything else, Sarah, that I've missed out?
I think that's everything that's on the panel, but we will catch up with anything if I've missed something. We'll catch up with that afterwards, and as we normally do, we'll post the Q&A with the answers on our website. Just on the question of musical tuition, I should mention that at the CCWP meeting, which I mentioned earlier, I did ask about music tuition because, as parents may be aware, there were plans in the council to make quite heavy cuts to musical tuition in coming years, and they had been planning to consult on how that would be carried out. And I understand from speaking to Ian Perry, the convener of the Education Committee, that the Scottish Government funding coming in has meant that at least for the coming year it will not be cut, and he was a little bit vague, but that he felt it should be possible to keep it at least at the level it should be. So we'll be happy on behalf of the Parent Council to ask Donald formally to follow up on that. There was the issue though about what might happen in the following years and whether Scottish Government funding would continue there. So it's obviously an issue we have to keep an eye on for the future. I think that is us finished for the evening. I'm not sure if we've had anybody else joining the Parent Council. I certainly haven't seen any signs of a Vice Chair coming over the horizon to help us out, but if anybody is interested in the future, please get in touch on another occasion. Those who have already volunteered have been posted on the Q&A, so you can check that if you wish. I'd like to thank them. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this evening and to thank you for your questions. And as I mentioned earlier, they will be captured and posted on the website with answers. And thank you also to Donald for his update and for answering all these questions. I've just had a confirmation that there are no new volunteers via email. So we have, I think, about 25 or 26 on the Parent Council for next year. Final reminder that our next meeting will be on Tuesday the 30th November, and we will send out more information near the time. And in between times, please feel free to send questions or issues to the Parent Council, and we will try to follow up on your behalf with those. And until the 30th November, I'd like to wish you a lovely October holiday. Thank you and good night.